In today's episode, we are talking concurrent training. You may have heard it referred to as hybrid training, which is a training modality in which we improve both strength and endurance simultaneously. So, how do we go about doing this smartly to maximize gains for both strength and endurance? We're going to go over it all today. And if you like this episode, don't forget to go down to the show notes. I'm going to link a couple things in there with YouTube videos showing how you can incorporate concurrent training into your program and our training teams. In which case, if you want for us to deliver you the blueprint and do the guesswork for you, the link's right down there. So let's get it started. All right, so we're going to have a conversation about concurrent training. We like to use the term concurrent training. A lot of people have also referred to this as hybrid training, but essentially what we're talking about is trying to advance both strength and some of your endurance modalities simultaneously. And we want to get into, if you are somebody that needs to possess really a wide range of physical qualities in both like the strength and aerobic conditioning standpoint, how do we do so effectively and in a way that you're going to get the most bang for your buck? So we've got Jimmy and Ben on here again, and we're going to talk through some of this stuff. So Jimmy, you've been working with athletes for a while now. Ben, you have as well. Oftentimes they have goals that are both strength and endurance focused, and we know that those things can sometimes conflict with each other. So Jimmy, how do you go about programming or dialing somebody into like what is a realistic goal when they want to advance across multiple qualities?
So again, you can work multiple qualities, but at the end of the day, there's still going to be a main focus, and then there's going to be a secondary focus after that. So it depends on the time of year, whether you're an athlete getting ready for a collegiate season, whether you're just the average person trying to run a 12-week cycle, you're going to be working all qualities, but again, something is going to take precedent. So in the early off season, the further away you are from a competitive event, I'm going to use athletics, for example, because I was in athletics for 13 years, but at the beginning, early part of the off season, we're going to be working hypertrophy and strength. It doesn't mean we're not going to be working conditioning, but my main focus would be hypertrophy and strength, still touching on power as well, but also having conditioning, but we're not as specific to what we need as we get further towards the competitive season, where conditioning, speed and agility, all those other qualities will take precedent because we've built a foundation under the strength and the hypertrophy. So that's basically just the easiest way to describe over like a cycle, is to focus on everything within a cycle, but there's still going to be a main focus within that block. So
yeah, I think that's the reason that at least like you and I on our teams, like I'm a big fan of block periodization. So, while it may appear that you are working multiple qualities, like there's still that one that is the priority. And I think it's important for people to understand too, that like within like block periodization, I'll give an example of what we're doing right now on Warfighter. So we're in a max strength block. We have power coming up next block, right? Started to reintroduce the hang clean back into training, not because I'm necessarily looking to improve their hang clean, like 1 rep max as part of this block, but I want to start introducing that movement more back into training. So like one, we don't have a detraining effect from when we did a hypertrophy block before, but also we're just starting to prep, and we're maintaining that movement pattern before we start to give it more emphasis in the follow-on block.
that makes sense. Then the other thing we should talk about is how do you do it? So there's undulating periodization. So there's daily, weekly, and session undulating periodization. So daily undulating periodization looks like if you're lifting Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you have a strength focused day where everything in that day is strength focused. Another day is power focused where everything is power. And then another day is hypertrophy. That would be daily undulating periodization. Weekly would be everything that week is strength. Everything the next week is power. Everything the next week is hypertrophy. And then the one that I like typically that I use, especially for lunch pail, is session undulation. So basically I start off with a strength movement, then a power movement, and then some sort of higher volume hypertrophy movement. So those are just 3 different approaches while still balancing the overall theme of concurrent training. Because the biggest thing is when you're adding multiple stressors, you have to figure out how to balance out the week and where to put each thing. Like all right, if I'm going to lift, I typically gravitate towards Monday, Wednesday, Friday lift, and then Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday conditioning, just to allow for recovery and things like that. I think that's really important. So to understand.
Yeah. And on the conditioning piece, I know you're a big fan of, regardless if you're trying to be or trying to train in a concurrent training style, or you fancy yourself as like a hybrid athlete. I think there is a strong use case for a heavy dose of aerobic conditioning, no matter what type of athlete you are.
Correct.
You agree with that?
100%. And while, especially early on in a cycle where we're really trying to push strength and hypertrophy, aerobic conditioning will aid in recovery. So that's the best way to start off a cycle, especially when you're pushing the strength and the hypertrophy or even power, is to just slowly build out your time, or minutes, I should say, with conditioning. So, and then as you kind of phase away from the, the strength and power, and then you can add in more qualities of speed work and manipulate the energy systems with your conditioning as well. But early on, I usually keep it more aerobic until we make that transition.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know for the tactical population out there, that when I was like growing up in the Army, there was this whole thing of like, hey, you never had to run like 2 miles in combat, or never had to run 5 miles in combat. And I was like a believer of that for a while. And now I think I'm like so much more, I don't know, I see it from a different lens, because you look at all the things, and like, while like warfighter tasks may be very anaerobic in nature, a lot of what you have to do is over a prolonged period of time. So I think back to the days of like the global war on terrorism, where it wasn't uncommon that, you know, a soft unit would go do a hit on a house, gain some sort of intelligence, and then like they're flying to the next objective, and like they're knocking on doors all night long. And like, granted, like the actual door kick and some of the things that you do in the house that's like executed violently, like, is very anaerobic in nature. Your ability to like recover between these bouts of high intensity and go in and do it again and again. And we're talking about a single day, but then you stretch that over the span of, you know, a 4 to 6 month deployment. Like, your ability to like recover between high intensity bouts of activity is very much an aerobic function.
100%. And the way I look at like the tactical population is like, you're a manual laborer that has to operate at a high cognitive level, because you have to, like, to your point, you basically have to do a lot of work for a long period of time. And then when push comes to shove, then you have to get into that anaerobic system. But majority of your work, whether it's at the range, whether it's just daily training, is a lot of aerobic style training. So it's really a manual laborer with high aerobic capacity and cognitive ability.
No, I totally agree. The aerobic piece for the tactical population is huge. And I think that's where a lot of confusion also comes in then about like, how should training look, and like, how do we balance all these things? Because just given the type of people that are within this population, there's a lot of desire to hit like heavy deadlifts, pack on muscle, but then a lot of the job requirements are very, very aerobic. So like, how do we walk somebody through doing both in a way that like satisfies what they enjoy out of training, but also answers those job requirements?
I think it's just thinking about, or just not letting your training sway too far in one direction or the other. So like, training like a powerlifter is great. There's a time and place to get strong, explosive, all those things. But then if a 2 miler gets sprung on you, you may not have time to train up for it. So you should always be at this like cruising altitude where you can do anything, whether it's do the 1,000-pound club or run a sub 13 2 mile, whatever it is, but always kind of maintaining that so you can pivot when needed.
Yeah. I think that pendulum, and I'm certainly not speaking on like behalf of the military here, but just my observations is that for a while it was, and maybe this was just due to culture and like lack of equipment availability, but like there was a time in the military where all they did was run. You heard people discuss that about like, hey, every morning, like we're going out and doing a 5 mile or whatever it is. And then I think people got more educated. And again, speaking anecdotally, just from my observations of what I was in, but CrossFit came into mainstream military culture. And I think that people can say what they want to about CrossFit. In general, it did get a lot more people thinking about getting under the barbell and performing movements that were something other than just running or rucking down the road. So I think that it did have a lot of like good quality, like lasting cultural benefits to military fitness. Not endorsing it as it's like the end all be all training program, but it got people thinking about tactical fitness or functional fitness a bit differently than they had before. And then I think the pendulum has the risk of swinging like too far another way, where it's like, hey, we're too into this. And I remember hearing these discussions of like, well, I don't even have to run anymore because I've been doing CrossFit and like my 2-mile time improved. And say, well, your 2-mile time improved just because like you are like doing something aerobic, but like we can't say that something that is not running is going to have the same benefit as like actually performing the specific task that you're tested on. Like you still have to do those things if you really want to maximize like your ability to perform well in that modality.
100%. Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, I think CrossFit just kind of opened people's eyes up to, like you said, training with a barbell, but also balancing out some gymnastics pieces. Like I knock CrossFit a lot, but if it's like anything, if you have a good coach, it can be executed well, but it's just really the hybrid and the concurrent training. Hybrid is just this new word in strength and conditioning, but concurrent training is really what it is. And it's just balancing the two. And it's how are you going to do that? The issue I see with CrossFit a lot of times, there isn't the recovery piece that there is with like a good strength and conditioning program that has just an overall balance to a plan.
And that's a good point too. When we talk about like concurrent training, like it's training, it's not testing. My dig on CrossFit is that it is structured in a way that every single workout is a test, because when you show up, it's we're doing this for time, this for weight or whatever. So like you should be training. I don't know what the percentage is off the top of my head, but like 90% compared to the amount that you're testing your training. And like that test date should be something of like, hey, we're going to put this on the calendar and like we're training for X amount of time and then we test. CrossFit, like you're essentially hitting your red line every single workout because everything is for time, for weight. And I'm not trying to speak for everybody because like there are varying levels of like CrossFit coaches out there with different like program design experience. And I've seen some CrossFit programs that seem to be set up very well. And then I've also seen some where, I don't know, let's just say a level 1 coach that like just got their certification, takes 48 hours without any real like background or anything. Like technically they're qualified then to like program and coach CrossFit. So there's a huge spectrum of experience and understanding of program design there.
Well, then with that, you guys both referenced it with having a proper coach. But if you get the guy who doesn't know what they're doing, did one of these 48-hour courses, you're essentially exercising every time as opposed to training, because it's like you said, you're redlining. We're not actually putting a certain stimulus in there to make progress for a certain goal.
Yeah, just making things to be hard.
Anybody can make something hard.
100%.
Yeah,
yeah. And I think that is with concurrent training or hybrid training, as you mentioned, people are calling it these days. There's almost, it almost requires, I'm not going to say like I'll say it requires a detailed and in-depth understanding of program design and how to balance various stressors, because you can't just get a bodybuilding program and then a marathon program and stack them on top of each other and expect to have good results.
Yeah, you're going to be mediocre at both, at best.
Yeah.
You're not going to be stage ready for a bodybuilding show, and you're not going to be a good runner. You're just doing both, but you're not good at either. Whereas if you have a plan, like this block, I'm still going to be running, I'm still going to be lifting, but my main focus is moving the needle on my 1RMs, but I still have conditioning in. And then, hey, in 3 months down the road, I'm going to back off some of my intensity in the weight room and I'm going to start building out my volume or building out my speed on my runs. It's as simple as that. Have everything in your program, but just realistically think, what am I trying to get accomplished with this cycle, and really focus on that. And then you can segue, because again, you're at that cruising altitude where you can pivot and move in any direction, but you'll still have a main focus of that block.
Well, yeah, I think with that, I forgot which book it was. I remember reading it a little over a year ago. They were talking about, in these concurrent hybrid programs, for it to be successful, you have to cut the fat off the program. So you have to do the meat and potatoes of what you need. You can't have the extra volume that you might have in a bodybuilding program, or the extra running you might have if you're truly just doing, a program for a marathon. You have to cut the excess fat off of it and give what you need in that training program.
Yeah, 100%. And the one thing also that I typically follow is the high-low approach. So high nervous system demands on a particular day, and then low nervous system demands on the next day, followed by high, then low, and alternating like that. So you're guaranteeing that you can recover from those bouts of high intensity training. So what does a high nervous system day look like? That's strength training, that's power development, that's sprint work, having that all on one day, followed by another day. You can still train, but it should be more lower intensity, lower nervous system fatigue, like a zone 2 easy paced run, like a stair stepper, incline treadmill walk. That would be like a Tuesday, and then Wednesday followed up with another heavy strength day plus power. So just understanding how to manage the week with your strength work and your conditioning work, I think, is really important for a lot of people.
Yeah, that's exactly how I also try to think about, the micro cycle or the training week when it's set up. Typically on Warfighter, we do 3 days of strength training a week. We're a little bit different with this 12-week cycle where we're doing 4, but essentially we're set up with a max effort lower to start the week off. And then we actually do 2 max effort total days throughout the week, but one of those total days is a push press. So we have like a lower Monday, a heavy push press Tuesday. And then that Wednesday is just zone 2 aerobic conditioning. And not only just for building that aerobic base, but like I think about it in terms of like if I were to show like an intensity chart throughout the week, it's like, hey, we have 2 days where we're pushing a little bit, and then we're going to drop that intensity almost like to nothing. And then I'm going to have 2 days where we're pushing it a little bit again. And then we have like some kind of lower intensity strongman conditioning and a progression run Saturday, followed by total day of rest. And it's really just building in like, hey, I'm going to ask you to go hard for like a 48-hour time period, and we're going to bring you back. We're going to go again. And that's how we make that kind of like incremental progress over a period of weeks versus feeling like you just got beat down every single training session.
100%. And with Warfighter right now, are you doing lower? Is it total body every day, or is it
still total every day? Yeah. It's just we're doing the emphasis on Monday is max effort lower. Tuesday is a max effort total, but it's the push press. Wednesday, aerobic conditioning. Thursday is our max effort upper with the bench. And then Friday is our deadlift day.
And that's a perfect example. You're still managing the stresses, even though I'm doing Monday, Wednesday, Friday, high, low day. You're still managing the stresses even when you're doing the 4-day split. So again, just for those of you guys listening, like there's a lot of different ways to do this, but just understanding that on our end, we are looking at the week and figuring out where to put each thing, whether it's strength work, whether it's endurance work, to allow you to recover most successfully.
Yeah. And I think that's probably what I spend most of my time on when I developed that initial training program, actually, because it was like, well, if we're going to do 4, then, what are we doubling up on? Like, we're going to double up on the total body, but strategically, like, where do I put these things within the week? Because I know also, hey, I'm going to push them kind of hard for like a couple days. I got my aerobic conditioning day. Then I can even start that Thursday with the max effort bench. That isn't quite as damaging as like a max effort deadlift. So then I know when I'm going into my kind of max effort deadlift day on Fridays, I've recovered them as much as possible. And I know I can ask them to push the weights that I'm going to ask them to push on that Friday.
Yeah, that makes sense.
To me, though, like the piece that people have to understand too, and like Ben made a really good point earlier, is that we're seeing where we can cut the fat. And But I get questions a decent amount on warfighters, like, well, how come there wasn't like this in the program? It's like, well, I would love to like throw all that stuff in, but we get to a point where we do have to make some decisions on, hey, we can't have these guys just in here training for 2 hours a day. And even if they were, like, it wouldn't be beneficial. So not every week or every cycle is going to have every single thing in it. It just wouldn't make for a good training program.
Yeah, I agree. My foundation is 3x3, 3 days a week, 3 big movements per session. And that's it. Like, again, I add some accessories for balance, some grip work, some neck work, but it can be as simple as that. If you're going all in on 3 movements per day, most of the time, that's really all you need. Like, again, you can add some window dressing to it, but overall, 3 days, 3 days a week, 3 big movements, and then adding the 3 conditioning days to button everything up, I think is the easiest way to do a simple total body plan.
Yeah. I will go ahead and just make the shameless plug for it right now, but I'm pretty excited about kicking off Warfighter Elite. So we had a lot of people that asked us about small group training, and that's kind of like what Warfighter Elite stands to do. So it's essentially our Warfighter program. It's not the exact same programming, but because there is so much nuance with concurrent training and then people's like individual circumstances, equipment availability, things like that, Warfighter Elite helps kind of answer these questions by having the program, but then also having the small group accessibility of like weekly Zoom Q&As. So like 1 60-minute session and Q&A for strength training and like just training in general each week. And then 1 60-minute Zoom call with our dietitian, Eric, every week to help people understand how they should also be eating in support of training like this. I think that there's a lot of like gains left on the table by people executing a program, but not eating properly to support that program. And then there's even more confusion out there about like, what does proper eating look like? You got guys that are, on Warfighter and like running this amount while still trying to do keto in a deficit. And they're wondering why, hey, I feel like beat down. Well, probably because your diet's not supporting the programming. Just the nature of the people that are on this team. There's a lot of people that are doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or something else outside of Warfighter. And, we get questions about like, how can I tailor this program? It's like, well, how many times a week are you rolling BJJ? Like that, I kind of need to know. Cause if it's 2, that's very different than like you going to BJJ 6 times a week. And then you're doing a military job, like, and you're doing Warfighter. Like, that's why we have these opportunities to go into a 60-minute weekly session with your coach and make sure that you can tailor the training appropriately for you. And then also helping, like when those guys come onto Warfighter Elite, going through a very like detailed and personalized like onboarding process. So yeah, the nice thing about the small group coaching is that it gives us the opportunity to really like get to know each one of those athletes. And while it's not an individualized program, the coaching accessibility and the feedback that you can get really helps you, tailor it to your specific goals. So I'm really excited for that kicking off. I think we're going to open it up on November 9th for sign up. I think that's this Saturday, and start working with people within there, which I think is going to be a pretty cool opportunity.
That's awesome. Especially thinking back in college, I'd work with hundreds of athletes and you'd get hundreds of different results because of the diet. Like us 3 could be doing the same program. Brian, you could gain 15 pounds. I could not gain an ounce, and Ben could lose 10, 15 pounds. And it's all what you're putting into your body. So the program is the same, but the results and the output is completely different based on that most important piece, which is the nutrition. So that's huge.
Well, and we saw that yesterday in the audits we did with the survey we put out there. There's a lot of guys who were, by their responses, were very, content or knew what they were doing training wise. But a lot of people, when it came to, macro and micronutrients, gave us like a 4 out of 10 of knowing where to start with it. And so those guys could immediately see, improvement in performance just by gaining better knowledge there.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I know you're going to answer it on the Q&A today, but like one of the Instagram Q&As we received yesterday, and I'll
It was,
pull it up
can you
just to make
bulk on
sure.
Warfighter?
Yeah, can you?
Paraphrasing, but
Yeah, can you bulk on Warfighter? And my answer to that would be like, absolutely. I think for most people, and like we talked about this on a former podcast when Eric was on here, but like for most people, like you should be eating at maintenance if your goal is performance, like maintenance or a slight surplus. So I think it's important when we say bulk that there's a difference in like dirty bulks I've done before where I'm just eating like everything in sight, and then like knowing what my maintenance calories are and eating slightly above that. And I'm not going to jump too much into like Eric's stuff here, but I would recommend that for most people, unless you have like some like body composition goals where like you need to cut some weight, if you're on Warfighter, like you should be eating at maintenance or like you should be in a slight surplus. Because if you're not, then like the fact of the matter is like you can be in a calorie deficit and like you can be losing some weight and like looking good. But the fact is like you're still under recovered if you're not eating at least at maintenance. So for most people, like, yeah, I think you should be in a slight bulk.
And it's a good point on this, what we're talking about today, like concurrent training. Like I mentioned, think about what you're trying to get out of the cycle. So with concurrent training, you're balancing strength and conditioning. But that person that wants to bulk, that's all well and good. Just understand that the conditioning piece is still important, but don't try to be moving the needle too much on your 2-mile time or your 5-mile time while your main emphasis is putting on size. Like that should be your main goal, but you're still doing the conditioning piece as well. So your body is used to running with this excess weight as well. So
yeah, totally. And I would actually say for people that are in a deficit or like they're trying to lose weight, the answer a lot of people arrive at is like, hey, I'm going to do more cardio and I'm going to cut calories. I have actually seen way better body composition results. And like, this is maybe obvious to us, but like if I'm in a caloric deficit, I am lifting as heavy and as often as possible a lot of the times because I'm really like fighting to preserve as much muscle mass as I can while I'm in a deficit. If you're in a true deficit, like the fat loss is going to take care of itself. And anyone that's worn their Fitbit or whatever, like when they're doing a run, knows that it takes, I don't know, however long to burn 300 calories. It takes about 8 seconds of Oreos to gain those 300 calories back. So like what you're putting into your body or what you're not putting into your body is significantly more important than the amount of cardio that you're doing. Now, is it a good strategy if you want to get some extra steps in, like after working out? Like, absolutely. But it's not the end all be all of fat loss. 100%. And that's why I say, yeah, if you're on Warfighter and like your goal is performance, then I think you should be eating at maintenance or a slight surplus. And also another question that came up on the Q&A I saw this morning, and Jimmy, it'd be good for you to help answer while you're here because like this has a lot to do with lunch trail also. Somebody was asking, how should training be amended at 40 plus?
40 plus years old.
Yeah.
Again, it's all individual, but you can still, based on your schedule, your personal life, things like that, you can still manage everything and still have specific goals. But I think the longer you train, the less volume you need, especially as you get up there in age. Like you can still do your main movements hard, but you don't need as much volume as you did when you were in your 20s, where you just drank a pre-workout, took a dump, and then got under a bar. Like at 40 years old, you need to be thinking a little bit differently. You got to take your warm-up serious and minimal effective dose with your strength training. But you can still do it all. Just be cognizant of that is you're not going to recover as well as you did. So just balancing that out and having real expectations for your training cycles, I think is the best way to go.
Yeah. And I would say that guy was asking specifically about Warfighter also. And the only thing that I would add to that is that it's okay to not necessarily feel like you have to accumulate all of like the aerobic conditioning we do as running mileage. Mm-hmm. Like there's numerous other ways to get aerobic conditioning in, and like it's a longevity game. So I think people can generally do the workouts as prescribed, but like it's 100% okay to take a zone 2 day on a bike versus going out and pounding pavement on a run.
100%. Especially if your goal is not to run a marathon or a conditioning based running goal. That's what they make other pieces of cardio for. Low impact cardio are great options for longevity.
Yeah. And as we start to wrap things up, I'm kind of curious of your take also. Like, people on social media debate everything, and like, I don't really care that much about terminology. If somebody wants to call it hybrid training, they can call it hybrid training. We got into these debates about like, is there such a thing as like a tactical athlete? Like, I don't care. Like, as long as there is something that like common terminology that we understand the population that we're talking about, and we can apply the right training concepts to them, then I think that the terminology doesn't really matter. But one of the debates out there on social media is like, hey, is hybrid training actually like a newer concept, or have people been doing this for years? Have you seen, and maybe this is, you're not on Instagram as much as some other people, but like, do you think that you sense like more of this kind of like ultra runner or marathon runner combined with bodybuilding, like coming back more into the spotlight? I feel like it's more popular than I remember it back in the day.
Everything in strength conditioning sways back and forth throughout the years. Like concurrent training, I can't put a year on it, but it's been in research and in strength and conditioning for a long time. But social media hasn't been around that long. So when it first came out, it was probably just as cool, but we didn't have a social media influencer showing it to people in their pockets on their phones. So it's just getting popularized now. Call it hybrid, call it concurrent, call it whatever you want. I think hybrid is a good marketable term, because concurrent training, unless you're a strength coach that has studied it, you don't really know what that means. Whereas hybrid, that kind of makes sense. It's a little bit of everything. So I think it's just a better marketed word, but concurrent training has been around for a long time. Like, people have been running and lifting for a long time. It's just becoming more popularized, which I think is a good thing. Like, you get guys like Cameron Haynes who lifts and runs, and it's like this mind-blowing thing that somebody can lift and run and do all these things. But at the end of the day, it's been around for a while.
Yeah. And as far as lifting and running, one thing we haven't really talked a lot about so far on this podcast, we kind of have, in terms of like, you got to focus on kind of one modality at a time to really make like measurable progress, but like the interference effect. And there's research out there that shows that, like, yes, it is a thing, but when I always come back to with people, particularly like the tactical population, where it's like, I don't want to do this running because it's going to impact lift X or whatever it is. And I'm always kind of like, well, how strong do you think you need to be to do your job? Having how big of a deadlift does a soft guy need to have? Like, if his deadlift is 500 and he doesn't want to do that much running because his goal is to get to 525, is that extra 25 pounds on your deadlift like more important from a occupational perspective than having a stronger aerobic base? Like, I think I go back and forth with like, yes, recognize its existence and recognize that like we employ training strategies to mitigate it, but also like, I don't think it has a significant impact on people unless like you're a powerlifting athlete.
That's what I was going to say. Unless you're a high level competitive athlete, those interference, meaning like strength interfering with run or run interfering with your lifting, it doesn't matter for the average person. I'd rather somebody deadlift 2 times their body weight or squat 2 times their body weight for 30 to 40 years rather than, I'm trying to move the needle, I'm trying to deadlift 600, but then I'm injured and then I'm out of the strength game and it's over. Like, I'd rather consistency over the longevity of your career, longevity of your life, rather than just trying to focus so much on a 1RM, because to your point, what's that 525 or 650 deadlift actually going to do? Can you do it for 30 to 40 years and be consistent with your training? I think is the most important thing that I'm trying to preach in Lunch Pail. I know you're trying to preach with Warfighter, and Ben, the same thing with Brickhouse. So it's just training for the long haul and how to get there. So.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap things up. Yeah, obviously we talked a lot about Warfighter and Lunch Pail today. We have a few other programs out there that employ these strategies. So I highly recommend you go check out Modern Athlete Strength concurrent.com and grab a free trial on any of our training teams. See which one is right for you. Like I said, you can try them all out for free before ever making a decision. And if you like this podcast, do us a favor and give us a follow, drop a 5 stars, and we'll catch you guys next time.